All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a very special edition of the MMA Roundtable. We haven't done one of these in quite some time, so it's very exciting. Last month over on our MMA page on ESPN.com, we presented our Mount Rushmore of the greatest heavyweights in mixed martial arts history. It was a hotly debated topic. And so with the welterweight title fight coming up on April 24th, Jacksonville, Florida, Kamaru Usman against Jorge Masvidal, we thought, all right, let's keep this train rolling along here and do the exact same thing for the welterweights. And perhaps there's a little more discussion when it comes to the welterweights, because there have been some great champions over the years in the 170-pound division, not just in the UFC, by the way, but in the entire sport. So let us introduce our panelists today. We've got Brett Okamoto here. We've got Marc Raimondi here, and we've got a very, very special guest. I haven't done an on-camera interview slash roundtable slash show of any kind with the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim. I mean, it has been 3+ years. It's about time you make your triumphant return. The people have been asking for you, Jeff. So welcome back.
Yeah, they've been asking, but now that they've got me, they'll be asking to get rid of me. So it's all balances out in the end.
I appreciate you dusting off one of those infamous shirts of yours. Thank you for that nice touch.
A little chilly today. I should be wearing my sweatshirt, but
listen, I know you from back in the day. You would wear one of those shirts in December or January. So in April, it's no skin off your back. Pardon the pun. Okay, let's get into it. We all have our top four Mount Rushmore. For those that don't know, the presidents on that mountain, the top four. So these are the top four best welterweights in the sport. And I do think it's appropriate that we all give our top four. We'll see if there's any disagreements there. And then at the end, we'll tell you, what we ended up with as a collective unit. And I would like to go to Mr. Wagenheim first, out of respect for the elderly statesman who's making his triumphant return. Let's go to the man in the shirt first. And historically, Jeff has been known to kind of, say some pretty outlandish, crazy things. So I'm expecting something crazy to come out of your mouth here. Without further ado, Jeff, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm not going to disappoint you. I'm going to go a little bit outside the box, not with three of the names. Three of the names I think are probably pretty obvious. I think George St. Pierre, it's hard to imagine anybody not considering George St. Pierre at least one of the four faces on a Mount Rushmore. Matt Hughes, who was the greatest ever before George St. Pierre, is at this weight class, is the other one that I have there. I have the guy who is going to be defending his belt this at UFC 261, Kamaru Usman, a work in progress for sure, but I have him already earning a spot. And then I have somebody who really didn't make his bones technically as a welterweight, and that would be Royce Gracie. Royce Gracie, who was the winner of three of the first four UFC events, and basically competed, I believe it was 176 pounds for the first two and 178 pounds for the third and fourth UFCs. So even though he never technically was a 170 pounder back in those days, but he wasn't cutting weight. And it just seemed wrong to me to have a mountainside with faces carved in it of guys at that weight and not have Royce Gracie as one of them.
All right. So I suspect that there is going to be some overlap there. I don't know if all four are going to be the exact same on each of our lists. Just to let people know, George St. Pierre, 25-2 overall. Matt Hughes, 44-8. Kamaru Usman, 18-1. Other names that could be discussed: Tyron Woodley, Robbie Lawler, Johnny Hendricks, Nick Diaz, Carlos Condit, Douglas Lima, a couple of the guys that you mentioned. I mean, Royce Gracie was never a welterweight champion per se, but St. Pierre did have 12 victories in title fights. Matt Hughes, 9, Usman, 4, Woodley, 4 as well. So, all right, very good list there. Jeff, I appreciate it. I like that you went off the beaten path there with the last one. Let's go to Brett next.
Yeah, that was way off the beaten path. I mean, when you're making your case for the best welterweights in the world, and one of the first things you say is, well, he didn't really fight at welterweight. That is a Jeff Wagenheim response for sure. I do not have Matt Hughes on my list. My list is pretty I'm sorry, I do not have Royce Gracie on my list. I do have Matt Hughes on my list, and the other three are the same as Jeff's. I have GSP 1. By still a pretty clear margin, although I think Usman is making it interesting. And certainly if, he keeps doing what he's doing over the next year or two, I think that's a very, very interesting conversation to have between he and GSP. I actually have Woodley number 3 for me. And then I had Matt Hughes there at number 4.
Okay, so GSP, Usman, Woodley, and then Matt Hughes. Was there anyone who was threatening Hughes for that last spot, or was this a pretty easy exercise?
It was a pretty easy exercise for me. I think the closest one for me would actually be Carlos Condit, 5. I did, Carlos has just had such an incredible career. A lot of people thought that he beat Robbie Lawler when they fought, in that amazing fight. So I think he's probably the closest one in that conversation for me. Lawler, of course, is right there, but he was a middleweight throughout a lot of his career. But no, it wasn't really too difficult for me. I was pretty solid on those 4.
All right, Marc, you're up next.
Yeah, this was just as tough as the heavyweights to me, and obviously George St. Pierre is number 1. I don't think anyone really disputes that. That's pretty consensus. And then Matt Hughes, he did so much, and he was kind of the standard bearer in that division for so long. So I have those 2 for sure. And then I do feel like Usman has put himself in that conversation with what he's done recently, and he's still growing and building and could even, go further up that list. The 4th spot, I really had a hard time because I was trying to, think of someone who was a can't miss. And to me, there wasn't anyone in that 4th spot that was a can't miss. I did go with Tyron Woodley because of his time as the UFC champion, also what he did in Strikeforce. But, I considered people like Pat Miletich, who was the first UFC welterweight champion. I considered someone like a Jake Shields, who had a lot of great welterweight wins outside the UFC and also some pretty good ones inside the UFC. So that was a little bit of a tough one, but that was my list in the end. GSP, Hughes, Usman, Woodley.
Any so you do it in that order. Do you give Usman, because as of right this moment, Usman, Woodley, same amount of victories in title fights. Do you give Usman the nod because he actually beat Woodley?
I do give Usman the nod. Not only that, but just his the body of work too. I mean, he hasn't lost in the UFC. I mean, he has a great winning streak right now, all in the welterweight division, and I think you have to give him a little bit of a bump because of that. One of those things where here's a guy that he only has 3 title defenses, but if he had gotten the title shot sooner, we could be talking about an even greater body of work.
That's true.
Yeah,
that's a good
point. I even describe Woodley. Usman as a work in progress, and
sure.
And I think that's kind of the same thinking that we haven't seen him fade out. Some people will argue. I mean, actually, Woodley was my guy that I was on the cusp of, and there are people who will argue against him because of the Woodley we've seen the last couple of years, but we haven't seen that guy in Usman yet. Like, Usman is still riding high. There may come a time a few years from now when he's in the place where Woodley is now, fading a bit. And so that's the benefit of being a guy who's at the top of his game when these kind of things are being discussed.
Well, Brett, correct me if I'm wrong. You think that Usman is actually starting to become in the conversation with GSP, not so much the other way where, we're going to talk about him in the Woodley conversation that we're currently having, but the GSP greatest of all time conversation, right?
Yeah, I do. And that's because of the level of dominance that he's had. I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but he's similar to GSP in that not only does he not lose fights, he doesn't lose rounds, And I just think that the space between he and his peers, that gap is reminiscent to me of the one with GSP. And I know he and Colby had a very, very close fight. So there are, of course, holes that you can poke in this a little bit in terms of, I'm not saying that he's just, unbeatable and he's going to be the champion as long as he wants to be. That's not a foregone conclusion, but he has shown thus far, he has separated himself from the pack in a similar way that I thought GSP did. And I think Marc's point is a big one that I think GSP, like his UFC title fight was in his 3rd UFC appearance. I mean, he had been fighting for only a few years professionally when he got an opportunity. So I think Usman to kind of like to single out that he has only had a certain number of title fights is not really necessarily his fault. I mean, the guy has done nothing but win in the UFC, and he had 5-round fights that were non-title fights and against very, very good competition. So I don't really talking about championship fights is definitely important. It's definitely part of this conversation. But in the case of Usman, I don't really necessarily hold it against him because I just feel like he was kind of fighting that championship level just without a belt around his waist. So I think he is kind of creeping up close to what in my mind, George St. Pierre is and was.
It's interesting because
sorry to interrupt you, Ariel. I agree a lot with Brett there because Usman has won 13 straight in the UFC, and that's a winning streak that ties him with Khabib, Anderson. only one person in the history of the UFC has won more than that, and that's Anderson Silva. So I mean, I would say that Usman obviously has an incredible resume, and I would put him close to that conversation with GSP. I don't think he's quite there yet, and maybe he's not, right next to him, but he's still going, and he's still in the prime of his career. And we've seen him get better and better every fight. So it could be interesting here in the next couple of months and years.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think what's also interesting is, of the names that we are discussing, Usman is the one who probably has the ability to gain the most amount of ground. I mean, I mentioned Carlos Condit. He's probably not going to start rivaling GSP. Douglas Lima is the champion in Bellator, but I think most people think that there's probably a ceiling there. Usman is the one who could, by the time it's all said and done, rival the likes of GSP and Matt Hughes for the greatest of all time. I don't think he's there quite yet, just because he hasn't had the opportunity to do so, but he's certainly on that trajectory. I do think it's worth noting Colby Covington is a tremendous fighter who hasn't won the belt just yet, and crazier things have happened. He could win the title in the not too distant future and then go on a crazy run as well. I'll throw out mine just for the record. George St. Pierre, that was obviously the easiest one. I think we would all agree on that. Number 2 would be Matt Hughes, 9 title defenses. He was the godfather of this division for many years. Number 3 would be Usman, because of what he's done, because of the streak, and also because he did beat Tyron Woodley. So we were able to find out one was maybe in his prime, one wasn't, but he still beat him when Woodley was champion. And number 4 would be Tyron Woodley. I did have some pause with number 4. It was tough. Ultimately, I feel like those are the 4 top guys, but Lawler, Hendricks, Condit, Ben Askren, Nick Diaz, all kind of crept into my mind. Unfortunately, this exercise only allows us to do 4. And so the biggest dissenter in all of us is Mr. Wagenheim. What a shock. Who, by the way, did Hoist replace? Like, was that a tough one for you, or was this a no-brainer, Wags?
I said it was really Woodley. I mean, if
it was really okay.
I actually checked with someone and said, hey, do I need to? I mean, before I sent the list in, I said, can we think a little outside the box here, and is that okay? And if I had been told no, you've got to go with people who have technically been in that weight class, then it would have been Woodley. And I just, to your guys' point, particularly about Woodley and Usman, that difference. Woodley does own that win, but I think it is important to note where each guy was in his career at that moment when that fight happened. Now, I guess, to some extent, Woodley was still maybe at the tail end of his prime because he still was the champion, but it was almost as though Usman sort of knocked him out of his prime, and he really hasn't been the same since. And Usman, he has looked, as Brett brought up, he's looked amazing, and maybe he is creeping up toward GSP. He's got a lot fewer title fight victories, title defenses, I should say. But I don't think it's a numbers game. To me, it's not quantity as much as it is quality. And on that note, I actually think that I don't think this title fight against Jorge Masvidal is a great notch on his belt. I mean, I think that when you're a champion, you should be defending against the top person who has earned a title challenge, and that's what's been done traditionally. And you guys mentioned Covington. Covington is the number 2 guy in that division, not Masvidal, and Masvidal hasn't fought since he lost to Usman. So to me, yes, it adds one more. If he wins, Usman gets one more title defense on his record. But and I'm not diminishing that Jorge Masvidal is a really, really good fighter, but he's not a deserving challenger for the belt at this time.
God, I've missed you, Jeff Wagenheim. I mean, no one could break it down quite like that. In the end, ESPN.com goes with GSP, Hughes, Usman, and Woodley. So sorry about that. Anyone? It seems like for the most part, Brett, Marc, and I agree on this. Anyone want to have any final thoughts? Brett, Marc, any final thoughts on this? Do you feel like this list can change? Is there anyone coming up right now that you think can rival any of these 4 guys in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and be one of those 4?
Go ahead.
I actually just wanted to correct myself real quick. I said that Usman was tied with Khabib and Anderson Silva. What I meant was he's tied with Khabib and John Jones with 13 straight wins in the UFC, and Anderson Silva has 16, so he's number 1. So if Usman beats Masvidal, he goes into sole possession of second place as far as the longest winning streak in UFC history. That's pretty heady. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
pretty
but
big deal.
Jeff just said that win won't mean that much.
No. Let's not put words in my mouth. This is why I don't, do this kind of stuff.
Oh, right.
Ronnie, because of you.
This is why.
No, it's a win is a win. A win is a win. But
Right.
there are wins, and then there are title defenses. And to me, a title defense has a whole different, it's a whole different thing. And you got to be competing against the top. Look at Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier, I think most of us would agree, is the best lightweight out there right now. He wanted the money fight, and he did what I would say is the honorable thing. He said, I'm going to go and fight Conor McGregor and let those other two guys, Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira, go for the belt. He didn't go and get the belt and then take on somebody who wasn't deserving as a challenger. He went and said, there are money fights, and there are fights that are in the championship silo, and those two things sometimes get crossed over, particularly these days. And I think it's really great and honorable when a fighter recognizes that these are two different things.
Final thought, Brett?
Yeah, I don't think that the debate over who could replace one of these guys is a very interesting one, just because, to your point, Ariel, none of those guys that are sort of on the cusp are likely to change my mind anytime soon. So I think the most interesting thing when we look at this is how close, at least in my mind, because some of you guys had Hughes over Usman still. But my mind is at what point would Usman overtake GSP? And I'm not sure what that's going to take from him. And what's just really kind of interesting to me is, something that GSP brought up to you, Ariel, is that he admitted that the next generation of fighters are always better than the ones before it. But one thing about GSP is that he was so ahead of his time. I would take him and insert him in his prime into this welterweight division, and he might be the champion. You can't say that about a lot of champions from the past, just because the game has evolved so much. So that just shows how high GSP is and what regard that we hold him in. So it just begs the question to me of, like, what is Usman going to have to do to ever top this guy, and can he? So that to me is the most interesting thing when we look at this Mount Rushmore.
Well, the beauty in all of this is Jorge Masvidal can screw up all these plans on April 24th, right? He's getting another crack at Kamaru Usman, despite Jeff's best wishes to stop that from happening. He's getting another crack to become the welterweight champion, and we'll see if he gets it done. UFC 261, April 24th. If you want to read more about all of this, go to ESPN.com/MMA right now. We've got the whole breakdown there for you. All right, we're out of time. For Brett, Marc, and the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim, I'm Ariel. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.